All right. Well, welcome to a packed house today, and we're here to talk about zero to hero data management and mobility. I've reversed that with SUSE Rancher and Veeam. I'm not Matt Slaughton. He is. Matt, thank you. This is his talk. I'm here as a guest. And my name is Robert Serchia, and I can work at SUSE. So nice to meet everybody.
But it's not Sriracha, right?
It's not Sriracha.
Okay. Nice. So our agenda today, high level, we're going to obviously do an introduction, talk about who we are, kind of why we're here. Why should we care about data protection? Kubernetes, I thought it's all stateless, so why do we need to even protect any of that? What's the backup landscape look like? When we're talking about Kubernetes, data protection, backup, what tools are out there? What does it look like today? Where do we think it's going? And then what is Veeam Kasten? I can obviously talk about that. And we'll do a quick demo. Well, not so quick demo. It's about 10 minutes long, but we go through some mobility, some data protection.
I mean, every demo I've done, it's always been stateless.
It's always been stateless.
It's always been stateless. It's so easy.
It is.
Then you add the complexity of having, to be stateful, and then back it up, and the complexity to that is insane.
It's just why we don't need data.
No, it does. No.
Awesome, guys. So let me move ahead. So my name is Matt Slaughton. I work for Veeam Kasten. A little bit about my background about myself. I first installed SUSE Linux back in 2003. Does anybody remember YAST in the room? Anyone play with YAST? Okay.
You'd be surprised. Cool. There's some people who don't know what it is. It's okay.
It was a beautiful thing because I remember having to go with RPMs and try to manually find dependencies. Mm-hmm. And YAST was really that first tool that helped to take care of those dependencies for you. But I have an infrastructure background. I worked for a large hyperconverged infrastructure company for about 7 years. Prior to that, I worked for a large global system integrator for about 6 years, and basically across the gamut of technologies. So EMC, NetApp, vSphere, Citrix, Nutanix, if you can guess, that's the hyperconverged infrastructure company I worked for. And yeah, basically all the storage vendors. I also have some web development experience, less development experience than Mr. Sriracha. I'm just going to call you Sriracha.
That's fine.
It's been in my brain like that.
That's okay.
I have way too many hobbies, and if any of you guys are interested in any of these hobbies, please grab me afterwards. Would love to talk about motorcycling, model trains, fishing, cars, love it all.
I am not that as exciting. I'm a CNCF ambassador. I work here at SUSE. I have a developer background before I moved over to marketing, so I've spent 21 years as a developer. My hobbies include biking, cooking, and hunting. I didn't want to put kids on there because they're not really a hobby. They're more of a chore. So that's what I spend most of my time with because I have kids. So. All right, so let's talk Rancher Prime. Rancher Prime is our flagship product in our ECM portfolio, meaning it's our enterprise container management solution. And to talk about Rancher Prime, maybe I can do it.
Yeah.
So at SUSE, we have you've probably seen this slide before because it's one of our favorite slides to show. This is our portfolio of applications and products that we support our customers with, right? And on the Kubernetes side, we have a handful of tools that we use. We promote some of them within the CNCF, like K3S and Longhorn, and others are outside the CNCF, but we still put a lot of love into it, and that includes our K2, our K3S, Longhorn, New Vector. It's the wrong logo, I'm sorry. I'll get yelled at it later. And then Harvester for HCI, right? So with that, you need a good foundation. And so we have Enterprise Linux that manages all that from SUSE Manager to Sleeve Micro. Sleeve Micro 6 was just released this week. Very exciting for that. And then we have SLES and then SLES for desktop. So, SUSE, we call it SUSE Rancher by SUSE, so it's confusing for me.
Sorry.
SUSE Rancher Multi and Hybrid Cloud Management. Rancher manages multiple clusters, has the ability to manage multiple clusters. With Kasten, that gives us the ability to back up and restore with data disaster recovery, BDR is what we call it. So from a Kubernetes management platform, it's SUSE by Rancher, or Rancher by SUSE, excuse me. And then for that backup and recovery, it would be Kasten by Veeam. Did I get that one right? Or are you guys going Veeam Kasten?
So to confuse things, it is now officially Veeam Kasten, but it was previously.
See what marketing's doing to us? These name changes are killing us.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. So from the public cloud to your data centers and to the edge, and we do see people running K2 at the edge now, and K3S within the data center. So it is an edge world.
Cool.
There you go. This one's you.
Yes. So we kind of alluded to this at the beginning. Why do we care about data protection or migration or mobility in Kubernetes, right? I thought everything was stateless. Everything's a container. I can just pick up a container and move it to a different cluster, right? Unfortunately, that's not the case. So I guess show of hands, who here is running Kubernetes or has touched Kubernetes? Okay, good. So always good to do a level set. You'd be surprised, no disrespect to the parent company Veeam, a lot of Veeam hardcore backup admins have not touched Kubernetes, so it's always good to kind of level set, understand where you're at. So it's good, though. I'm happy to see most people in the room have. If you haven't, no big deal. Obviously, check out K3S. That's a great way to get started. It's how I got started with Kubernetes.
Actually, Rancher Desktop. If you want to get started really easy, Rancher Desktop allows you to download, play with Kubernetes, and you don't have to install. And if you mess up, there's a reset button. So for anyone who's not touched Kubernetes, that is the way I always tell people to get started. Because if you mess up, there's that factory reset. I use it all the time.
Bring me back. Bring me back. Cool. So let's dive in a little bit. What does this look like from a data protection? Again, why are we here? Why are we having this conversation? So, it really comes back to data services in Kubernetes, right? So I guess, and I kind of jumped the gun here. This actually applies for even if your data is outside the cluster, right? So if you're running using like RDS, if you're using a SQL database that's in a VM, you still want to protect that data. And then you probably also want to protect your application as well, right? So I realize that you can probably push that through a pipeline. You can push your app through. If it's completely stateless, then yes, maybe you only care about that data, and then your stateless app is fine. The thing is that we have to account for human error, we have to account for security threats, and things like deleting secrets or changing config maps. Right? So again, some of this stuff you can obviously do via pipeline. A lot of organizations do, and that's great. But you still want to consider making sure that you can back up kind of one anatomical unit. So you're not having, when it comes time to restore, if it's your business critical app, you're not having to go do a SQL restore and then go back to your app and make sure your root password's correct in your config map. So we'll start kind of there. And then on top of that, why would we want to consider putting data services inside the cluster, right? So, I thought, let's again keep it stateless and use everything outside the cluster. There's a couple key advantages for running data services in Kubernetes. And when I'm talking about data services, I'm talking about things like Postgres or Mongo or Kafka or Cassandra. All of these things actually running in the cluster that definitely
would it work for like messaging as well?
Oh, good question. Yeah, I guess.
That's a good question.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, Redis, that's more.
You said the R word. I was thinking like RabbitMQ.
Yeah.
Maybe.
We definitely have customers running RabbitMQ. Good question, though.
That's a good one.
I have not personally played with it, but I'm fairly confident we have customers doing that. So kind of running through why we want to even start considering this. Number one, co-location and migration, right? So going back to kind of that containerization, the notion of containers and portability, there obviously is an element of portability, much like in the same sense as VMs. But when we're looking at Kubernetes or cloud-native apps, we want to be able to move our data and applications together, right? So a great example of this is maybe you have a development cluster running on K3S or even Rancher Desktop. There we go. Good plug. And you want to move this or promote this to production. It's a lot easier when your data is already in the cluster, right? You don't have to worry about, because maybe your Rancher Desktop's it's probably going to be on your desktop.
Yes, it will.
And production might be in your core data center, or it might be in one of the public cloud providers. At that point, you might potentially have a risk of data being very separated from the actual application. So you have things like performance, latency, and again, kind of think of that backup or mobility as an anatomical unit. So obviously starting with co-location migration, hopefully the benefits there are obvious. Number two, testability and copy data management. So this kind of goes back to copying maybe from development to production, but maybe also production to development, right? So we see this a lot with a lot of our customers. Big benefit of Kubernetes are namespaces. So I might want to take my production data as an actual working set, and before I push my code to production, maybe want to test that in a different namespace. It's completely separate. I don't have to publish the service publicly. I can keep it all in-house. But being able to quickly and easily do that really requires you to have that data in the cluster. And again, there's ways to, I think we're all technologists. We know that there's ways to do this with data outside the cluster. It's just easier, though, right? Like, as opposed to having to spin up a separate database, import the data. If you can just clone things into a different namespace, it saves you.
It's the reduction of operational costs, right? Because it's a different namespace. You just need maybe a different cluster, and you can do everything there. You're not the VM, everything else. You're not. It's just ancillary to it, and so you can just do it all on one platform, right?
Exactly.
Kubernetes is a platform to build platforms on.
Yep. Exactly. App and schema versioning, again, kind of going back to that data and application mismatch. Let's say you push new code that actually wants to address a different data schema. You have to make sure that your data schema matches what's in the code and vice versa. That can get a little tricky if you're disjoint, if you're using RDS, if you're using Postgres outside your cluster. Whereas, if it's the anatomical unit, you can do one big push that does the schema change and your code change at the same time. This is my favorite one just because it's fun to say, but polyglot persistence. Polyglot persistence sounds very fancy. Again, that's why I like to say it. But really what this means is we can use the best data service for our application. And I mean application both in the technical sense, but also like in the business sense, like how you want to apply your data services. So a great example of this is maybe, think of like a retail shopping app, where maybe for session IDs, I just want to use Redis, or I want to use Mongo. But for actual orders, I want to use a relational database like Postgres or MySQL or something like that. We can do that with Kubernetes, right? We can do that especially if it's all in Kubernetes, as opposed to having a separate Mongo database, a separate Postgres database. By having it all within kind of one namespace, or even multiple namespaces, we have it all on the same platform. Lastly is cost. Right, we've already invested in this infrastructure, whether it's on premises or in the public cloud. Why are we duplicating this and having a separate infrastructure for database and separate infrastructure for Kubernetes and application workloads? We might as well try to maximize our return on investment, use that same infrastructure for both our data and our application Kubernetes containers. And the data speaks for itself, actually. We see this a lot. We see the amount of customers in the real world actually pushing stateful data into their cluster more and more, right? So this is actually slightly out of date. It's actually a fair bit out of date now, November 2021.
That was a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it's 2024 now.
Yeah.
But anyways, so these numbers I can guarantee have only gone up. So what's the number one workload that we see actually as from a stateful perspective in Kubernetes clusters? Databases and data cache, right? So again, Mongo, Postgres, maybe RabbitMQ, that's more messaging. I don't know if here we go. But yeah, so we're seeing more and more enter the cluster, and again, for good reasons we mentioned previously. And there's many purists out there that want to very much keep their Kubernetes cluster stateless, and I think it's getting harder and harder to do when we're starting to look at more and more packaged apps. And it's just easy when you want to deploy WordPress, and WordPress via Bitnami will throw MySQL, or I guess it's MariaDB, same idea.
It's the worst demo ever.
What is?
The WordPress demo. It's like, oh, look how easy it is. And then there's that day two of like, what do we do with that data?
Yeah.
What do we do with it afterwards? How do we back up and restore it?
And you're setting me up for success because I actually have a WordPress demo as part of my demo.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Hopefully it goes smoothly. So, and again, this is kind of a building on the previous slide. This is based on Veeam's Veeam's annual data protection survey. Sorry, I skipped ahead to ransomware. Cliff notes, it is an issue. It's becoming more of an issue. It's becoming an issue for Kubernetes workloads, not just Windows workloads. So starting top left, 75% of organizations think that traditional and container-based applications can be backed up the same way. I use Veeam VBR today to back up my VMs. Can I just back up my worker nodes the same way? Or can I just export etcd? You can. Have you ever tried recovering from that? It doesn't always work great. Or maybe you'll get your configuration back, but your applications come back in a weird state. Because as we know, Kubernetes, you've got different worker nodes, things are getting scheduled, you have different pod counts that change over time. So to try to approach it using traditional backup tools just doesn't work. 75% of companies have experienced at least one ransomware attack in the past year, and this number is increasing. So I didn't mention this in my About Me slide, but I did take I won't call it a sabbatical because I still worked, but between my time at Nutanix and Veeam, I worked for about a year at an AppSec company. That AppSec company did a lot of things, one of which was a lot of industry analysis around threat actors, and it was more software focused, more supply chain focused and whatnot. But one of the key things that I saw when I was there, and this was now at this point a year and a half, was we actually saw threat actors targeting cloud native and Kubernetes workloads. not because it's inherently more insecure than traditional infrastructure, but they knew that a lot of organizations were new to Kubernetes and therefore didn't have the same controls in place. So they were just trying to exploit whatever path they could to get into organizations. So actually see threat actors actually trying to look for markers that, oh, this is a cloud-native application. Maybe I can go poke here, or check the ingress, or get creative when it comes to stuff like that. So becoming more and more relevant for cloud-native workloads. Obviously, we have a lot of tools like NewVector, now with StateStack as well for observability. We are keeping ahead of it, but we need to make sure our organizations are leveraging these tools and putting the necessary protection in place to ensure we can protect against these ransomware attacks. 93% of organizations think that multi-cloud support for container for backup is important. I think we'll talk about shared ethos, if I haven't mentioned already, between SUSE, Rancher, and Kasten, or Veeam Kasten, sorry.
Marketing again, getting you.
There's no marketing person here to slap me, so. But yeah, so this one should be obvious, right? Again, if we're running on premises, that's great, but we may not have it's kind of like a power company or power problem, is when you have a power grid, you have to plan for peak load. So think about trying to optimize your infrastructure. Maybe if you're a retailer, you only need, 10 worker nodes for 12 months, 10 months out of the year, but for those 2 months, you need a burst to double that size. Multi-cloud's obviously a way to do that, hybrid multi-cloud. So we're, again, seeing this in the wild. A lot of organizations are implementing this, which is great. Choice happens, as we say at the conference.
Yep.
Obviously, Rancher Manager, you can deploy to AKS or EKS, or you can deploy to RKE2 on premises or in the cloud. Likewise, we need to make sure we have data protection, backup, and mobility amidst those clouds with tools, hint, hint, like Kasten.
That is one of our better use cases that we see customers doing, where they're in a traditional data center, Rancher's managing everything else, and then when they have to explode, it's AKS, EKS, and Rancher manages all that. But it sounds like Veeam or Kasten Veeam Kasten.
Veeam Kasten, yeah.
Veeam Kasten will manage. See, again, the marketing would manage that backup and recovery for both with ease, one single pane of glass.
Yeah, and it's more than just backup too, which we'll take a look at. We can actually move applications across different distributions of Kubernetes, across different storage within Kubernetes. These are all the things that make containers less containery, but are still challenges that we face in Kubernetes that we need to address with the proper tooling, like Kasten. Lastly, a lot of 75s up here. 75% of organizations indicate a skill shortage in their Kubernetes backup and recovery teams. Again, this makes sense. I think probably for a lot of you in the room, you guys may be the only Kubernetes engineers or platform engineers within your organization. Or if you're not the only one, maybe you and a buddy. And this is happening for very large organizations, right? We see this across multinational banks where their platform and DevOps teams are maybe 10 people. So push comes to shove, going back to being technologists, yeah, we can script a lot of things. We can do a lot of really cool pipeline automation, but is that the best use of our time when we have other tools out there that can do it for us and do it faster, easier, and we don't have to sweat it when the poo hits the fan, to say. So what does the Kubernetes backup landscape look like? We've established, okay, we probably need data protection for this data, as well as mobility, disaster recovery. All these things still apply for Kubernetes and cloud-native workloads. So why can't I just script all this? Why can't I just put this in some YAML and export my YAML? You can. That is a way to do backup. But it kind of goes back to one of my favorite mantras. This is classic from my GSI days. Fast, good, or cheap. You can pick two. You can have something that's fast and good. It's not cheap. You can have something that's good and cheap, but it's not going to be fast. So think about this, for a homegrown solution. We actually have a large number of customers that try to do this on their own simply because they were either unaware of solutions like Kasten or they wanted to kind of try it for themselves and eventually found that, look, not the best use of our time to be trying to create these scripts.
But to be fair, sometimes when you go it alone, it's neither any of those.
Right.
Like, it's not good, it's not fast, and nor is it cheap.
Right.
When you start looking at it, it's just one of those, well, maybe I wanted to build it on my own.
Which, yeah, and I like to build stuff all the time. I love to tinker. But when it comes to, critical business, my critical business data, I think, again, probably all of us have that one experience where maybe not you, but maybe your colleague accidentally deleted something, or something goes down, and you've got the phone ringing saying this needs to be back up. Do you really want to be that single point of failure, your script that may be out of date to go recover? Just things to think about. So I won't read all these to you. Hopefully these make sense. Obviously we talked about ease of use a little bit. Disaster recovery is really important. Support, right? So again, if you're a small organization, you can't be the expert in everything, or maybe you can, but then you won't sleep ever. So really important there to have that support network, that capability. When things do break, you can lean on a professional support organization. Same thing goes for your Kubernetes platform. So there's a lot of options out here, right? So kind of diving in, we understand we need data protection. We understand we can script it ourselves. Maybe we can look at third-party tools. So I'm going to kind of pick on Longhorn a little bit. I love Longhorn. I think it's awesome. I've actually switched, getting ahead of myself, but I've switched my personal lab 100% to Harvester because it's awesome, works great. But that being said, Longhorn backup has some limitations, right? So it's free, which is great. It's included. It works pretty well for Longhorn. But as soon as you get outside Longhorn, how do you back that stuff up? Or how do you recover things outside of Longhorn? Security, you can implement it in a secure way, but it's up to you as an organization to do that. It's not secure out of the box. Moving to the right here is a nice open source project from our friends, I'll call them at Broadcom now. It was originally a VMware-backed open source solution, Valero. It is still under active development. Actually, we did an analysis on this recently. The most contributors contributing to this project right now are of a different Linux organization that wear certain colored hats.
Ooh, interesting.
So it serves a lot of their needs. But long story short, yes, it's free. Yes, it does provide off-cluster support, so you can move things into S3, which is great. But basically everything else, not so great. It's not super easy. There's no UI. It's not secure inherently, so you're left to do that yourself. There's no real ransomware protection. There's no support for things like S3 immutability or object lock, any of that. It does not provide it's got some basic application logical backups, not really. And lastly, cross-storage capabilities. You can do it, but it's not elegant. Just put it that way. Does anyone in here use Valero or some derivative of Valero? Okay, good. It's
I
easy
tried it once. It wasn't nice. It was really rough.
I know so I work in products, so I don't really, I have a dog in the fight, but not really, but I'd love to hear from my sales guys, whenever they walk into a customer that's using a Valero or Valero derivative, it's like an easy win, because you can talk to the guy that tried Valero, and it was just such a headache.
Yeah, it was rough. Prior to coming to SUSE, I gave it a whirl. I don't recommend it.
Yeah, you become the Valero expert, and that's all you do, which at the end of the day, we like to build things. Maybe building backup isn't the sexiest thing. Do you really want to be the Valero guy?
No.
Yeah. Storage vendors, you'll see a lot of this, and no disrespect to some of the storage vendors here, they will claim they have backup. In a way, they do, but again, think about that backup as the anatomical unit, as well as mobility, where yes, I can snapshot a PV and take the bits out of a PV, and that's a snapshot. But as Veeam likes to say, snapshots are not backup. Right, so going back to that kind of earlier example of being able to recover your data and application in the same go, you can't really do that with storage-based backup solutions. And there are other commercial offerings. There's a couple in the marketplace. I just kind of broad strokes over this. There is a couple out there, but it's kind of checkered in terms of their maturity, their enterprise readiness. Your mileage may vary. Anything else you want to add?
No, I think it was accurate.
Cool. I think I may have stolen this one from you. So
no, that's fine.
Okay. Oh boy.
Hello.
I guess I should point this way. All right. So let's talk about Kasten. Right. So I guess show of hands. Anyone get hands-on with Kasten in the room? Love it. Love it. Love it. Awesome. Cool. 2. I like it. I think 3. We got 3. So okay. Long story short, Kasten is more than just backup. And we need more than just backup for Kubernetes for the reasons we mentioned already, right? So, starting from right to left here, again, famous Veeam saying, but your ability to backup is only as good as your ability to recover. I think I brought this up in the interview yesterday, or I talk about it pretty often, but one of my favorite examples of this, it was not myself, but it was my customer. I was living in Australia at the time, working for a large Australian bank. The Australian bank ran a core system that they would back up daily, or really hourly, to tape. And it was pretty cool. I was in the data center at the time. This is going to date myself. We were putting vBlocks in. That was the cool new thing. Yeah. Oh, vBlock. But then they had this old tape robot, and you knew it was old because it was like that old kind of off-white, and a little robot arm would come and take the tape out and move it into the library. So they had that going, basically tick the box. Yes, they have the backup. Good, great, all good. While I was there, something happened. I don't think it was a threat actor, I think it was something internal. Somebody pushed a change, it broke a core banking application. And I remember, again, this was all kind of next to me, but I'm hearing this. I remember hearing the team, oh, don't worry, we can recover from tape. They sent one guy down to the warehouse to go recover the latest tape. They popped it in, was like, bring it back, read error. Uh-oh. They go and grab the hourly before that, pop that in, read error. They basically found a year and a half worth of tape that they had been paying. Buying tape was unrecoverable. So it underscores the point of your ability to back up is only as good as your ability to recover. You need to test this, I think is the big point here. How can you easily test things? Kubernetes namespaces, performing disaster recovery regularly, all of those more traditional things. Security, really important. Going back to that 75% of organizations have experienced a ransomware attack in the past year. Numbers going up. We need things like immutability for our backup storage. We need to be able to quickly audit and see when there's threat actors.
So if I can jump in there, when you say ransomware protection, are they attacking your backups and preventing you from recovering? So you're like, I got that. My code's all in GitHub privately, and I can just respin it up over there in AWS, and I'm not plugging AWS for anybody, but you can spin it up in a hyperscaler and then just pull it back up and go. They've actually gone around that now, and that's what they're attacking, going, yeah, you can try it, but we got your data and we got it on the backup.
They specifically target backup data because they know that's your fail-safe, right? So if it's not immutable, if it can be changed, they'll go for that first, and once they have that, they have you. So yes, we've seen that actually in the wild. We've had a number of customers that experienced that, where their backups were compromised, and then on top of that, whether it was a supply chain attack or just like a credential stuffing in a GitHub, actually, once they had the backups, they knew that they just had to flick the switch on the actual pipeline, and everything would fall apart.
Nice.
Get some of those Bitcoins. Data freedom, that's a really important thing too here, so we'll talk about this. But the nice thing about Kasten and the ability to back up, recover, that means we can also move things, right? So for disaster recovery, we're often not faced with the exact same environment. We may be running our K2 in our primary data center, but EKS for our warm, right? And I guess also show of hands. I like to just see people get kind of lay of the land, but how many people have seen a cloud spend build that blew your mind? Yeah. Okay. When I was at Nutanix, long story, but Nutanix used Google. I remember that first bill came back from GKE, and I was shocked about how much money we were spending.
I follow Corey Quinn on Twitter, and he analyzes cloud bills, and when he posts some of them there, I can't wrap my head around some of those numbers.
It hurts when you know really what's underlying. It's just infrastructure.
Yeah.
But it's so expensive. So yeah. So really important though to be able to leverage things like data mobility, data freedom to be able to move workloads is really important across clouds. So what is Veeam Kasten? Yeah, sorry, there's my nice little quote there. It's the next best thing since sliced bread. That looks awful.
I see Veeam. I see Veeam, but there it is.
There it goes. Okay. So a couple key points. It sounds like there's some people familiar with it in the room, but just to underscore, it is cloud native itself. It is a Kubernetes application. We're not a bolt-on. We don't just you don't point us to CAPI or Kube API. We ourselves are a cloud native app, and we treat ourselves like a cloud native app. So that means the world when you're looking at cloud native backup data protection mobility, because that means we can talk in the native language. We can work with things like Argo CD, Kyverno Policy, or Fleet. We can work with things like NuVector really easily because we're already in the cluster. So you talk about CI/CD pipeline automation is be able to create backup policy as code, right? And you can actually block builds if you don't have a backup policy in your build. So yeah, long story short, Kubernetes native, very important. It's not just a bolt-on. Security everywhere, we talked about this. Ransomware, immutability, end-to-end encryption, all of these things are really important. All of these things are, if you don't know today what your backup solution is, or if it has that, go and check, because it's really important. Ease of use, yes, again, I think we all like some YAML, we all like some code, but hot seat, again, data's offline. It's nice to go into a UI sometimes and just click recover and see a nice thumbs up or green check mark.
Yeah.
Just Yeah, it's like almost someone patting you on the back.
You want to repeat the question and answer it?
Yes, thank you for the other audience. So the question was what kind of storage is supported by Kasten, which is great because that ties into the last bullet point here, full ecosystem support. We are huge advocates of the container storage interface standard for primary storage, so storage on the cluster. Actually, we're very proud too. We just had a Kubernetes enhancement proposal, KEP, accepted and incorporated in, I think it's going to be in Kubernetes 1.31. So one or two more releases away, we actually are defining the change block tracking standard in CSI. So primary storage, CSI is the way to go. We do support entry as well, though. So if you're running in Google and Amazon and Azure, we can do entry that way. For secondary storage, any S3 compatible API. So obviously S3, but things like Wasabi or MinIO or Nutanix, that's S3 compatible, we'll support that. Azure Blob we support with immutability, and then as a fallback we can support NFS. NFS is interesting because they're adding things similar to object lock in NFS now. I know NetApp has like a file lock thing. Just your mileage may vary, but we support NFS protocol as well. In addition to that, like I said, any Kubernetes distribution that's a CNCF distribution, so EKS, AKS, RKE2, RKE1, K3S, yeah, all of the above.
So CI and CD, where's the rest of it?
There we go.
So both Kasten, Veeam Kasten, and us at SUSE Rancher, we believe in automating what you can and automating everything, right? Just not really going today.
Oops, sorry, that was me.
That was you. Whether it's with Ansible, Argo CD, or Terraform, we want you to be able to roll out, and we forgot to put Fleet in here because Fleet allows you to do the same thing.
Yep.
But we want you to roll out everything as automated as possible, and with the tie-in between SUSE Rancher and Veeam Kasten, that's a possibility with some of our APIs and some of the standardized tooling out there. We really need to change that to Open Tofu too. We had 2 misses.
Next time, yeah.
Next time. But with Argo CD, you can do this as well.
And worth noting too for the application and application security guys in the room, we want to look at data protection almost in the same vein as that we look at app security, right? So you have traditional static application analysis, supply chain analysis and software composition analysis. Here we go. Infrastructure as code, and now we can look at policy as code. Again, a lot of this probably isn't new for a lot of the folks in the room, but something that sometimes we don't think about when we think about data protection is it's just as important for security as those code analysis tools.
So, Harvester with Kasten, this is in flight, but wanted to kind of explain the architecture here. At the bottom, and you can do it within Harvester 1.3.1. You can actually, in Harvester, you can turn on the Rancher UI interface, and it looks just like Rancher. It's really nice. But you'll have your Linux nodes with Sleep Micro 6, Longhorn as your distributed storage, RKE2 running, and then either a cloud-native app, which would be considered a container, and then a KubeVirt virtual machine. Now, do you want to explain how Veeam Kasten actually does the integration and then backing up and restoring for that?
Yep. So I guess obviously Veeam Kasten lives in the cluster. Like I said before, we are a cloud-native app. We are a Kubernetes app. So you'll deploy to the cluster like you would for any other app. So we have a Helm chart. We're actually in the Rancher marketplace.
That's good.
And we can back up, obviously, cloud-native apps, containerized apps. The beautiful thing about KubeVirt is essentially making VMs a cloud-native app, if you will. So we can treat that the same way. We've done some customization. Need to support things like block mode, which Longhorn does. Read-write many, Longhorn does. So be able to protect that as well. We can now protect VMs in these clusters, in addition to containerized apps.
That's because the VM's running top of the hubs, right?
Yep. Yeah. You can do like a.
You wrote a blog about that.
I did. Yeah, you read my blogs. That's cool. Yeah, kubectl, git pods. You'll see your VMs in this as long as you're looking in the right namespace. It's just in the same way you would your containerized.
And now with this version of Harvester and beyond, the containers run at the same plane as the VMs, which wasn't the case before. So if you wanted just to run a single container, you couldn't deploy it. You had to create a VM, either put Podman on top of it or put RKE2 or K3S on top. Now it's like, oh, I have a legacy DB. It's running in the VM. And now I just want to run a container. You have that ability if that's what you need to do. Harvester can support that now, which is really cool.
Awesome. So, and yes, and 131, we believe we have the bits we need for Longhorn. I got to do more testing with my engineering, but expect to have full support from Kasten very shortly for Harvester.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I have a question. I've seen some.
As long as it's CSI, yeah, that's a great point because Harvester's adding support. It's not in 131. I think it's going to be 1.4.
1FR.
But supporting. So, the question was if I were using traditional storage CSI, so like maybe you have an HPE array or you've got a Dell array. If there's a CSI, sorry, or sorry, okay. But yeah, so any third party can Kasten back that up. Answer is yes, as long as there's a CSI that supports volume snapshots. Can absolutely back that up. All right, so I've done a lot of talking. You guys have been very patient with me. How are we on time?
Ooh, you got about 10 minutes.
Perfect.
10, 15, no, 12 minutes.
All right, so let's talk through this. Hopefully this looks familiar. This is a nice Rancher Manager. I'm running a K3S cluster and an RKE2 cluster in vSphere. This could be just as easy be RKE1. It could be EKS. Important thing is I've got 2 clusters. Go and pop open here. You can see them. Also have Harvester running here. I think this is actually that was 131. I filmed this on Friday. So jumping in here, I've got my cluster dashboard on my K3S. You can see I've got Kasten deployed. It is a cloud-native app. And here's my nice fun project, WordPress. So my K3S cluster, that's my dev one. My favorite demo app, WordPress. It's easy, Bitnami. And then here I've got my production cluster just running Pacman, business critical app. But I want to move WordPress to RK82. So first and foremost, let's take a backup on K3S, right? So I can see my applications. I can see Pacman. I've got multi-cluster here. There's RK82. We'll head back to K3S. Here's WordPress. You can see right now it's not managed. And I'm going to go ahead and set up. There's my blog I wanted to show you. A great blog post. This was created by AI, as was the image. It's actually a pretty entertaining story, but it's not one that I wrote. Nonetheless, I want to back it up. It's very important to me. So I'm going to create a policy. So we do all our things via policy-based backup. For this one, I could do some application awareness for simplicity and time. I'm just doing a simple snapshot-based one. But I've got all my enterprise features where I can change my retention. That way I'm not just consuming storage unnecessarily. I can actually define my lifecycle based on my organization's requirements. Very important here is I'm exporting to an S3 compatible object storage, which in this case could be immutable. It's not, again, just for time, and I didn't want to have to wait 24 days to delete it. So I'm going to go ahead and kick off my policy. Easy as that. This is backing up everything in that namespace. It's running the policy. It's performing the local snapshots. Should be pretty quick. There we go. And then we're exporting now to S3. Again, if this was really production, I'd probably want to do this to S3 with immutability. It's roughly this. It's the same performance. It's just, again, there's extra knobs you have to turn to do that. So we're exporting the actual restore point. So this is a full, again, kind of anatomical unit of the backup that's being sent off the cluster. And keep that in mind when we go to look to move this or restore it to a different cluster. So we're good. We've backed everything up. Let's go ahead and jump over to our terminal. I'm doing some, just to show you guys here, I'm grabbing my database password. Let's say, Robert came in and he just wants to mess with me. So he grabs the root password. He's got kubeadmin access. And he goes and decides to drop my table. So I've obscured, there's my clusters. I'm logged into the K3S one here. I had some typos. There we go. So here's Robert. He's looking at my tables, looking at my databases. And
why am I the bad guy?
You're the bad guy here, man. You're dropping my WordPress database. Right? You were telling me how much you hate WordPress. There you go. So you've killed it. Oh, now let's go check the blog. What happened to my AI-generated story? Oh, it's there, but let me refresh and make sure. Oh gosh, it's gone. What would I do if I didn't have a backup? So the good news is super easy to restore. I'm going to do an in-place restore here. So I've got my past day, blue is on cluster, green is off cluster. I know in this case that Robert was just messing with me, so I'll just bring it back from on the cluster. If there was some sort of ransomware attack or something, this might be a good opportunity to deploy a whole new cluster and restore it from off via S3. Here I can select specific resources. I know that he dropped my databases, so I don't need my config maps, I don't need my secrets, so I'm just restoring the PVC. So I'll run this. We'll jump into our restore here, wait for it to turn blue so I can click on it, grab a coffee, there we go. All right, so that's kicked off. It's restoring the artifacts super quick, right? It was on the cluster, so it was really fast to be able to restore from that volume snapshot. If I head back to the blog and refresh again, it's back. Thank goodness. All right, so I've backed up and recovered my WordPress application on my K3S cluster, but now it's time to actually promote this to production. And silly me, I don't have a CI/CD pipeline where I can easily do this. No worries, I can just do it via Kasten. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is export my application. You go here, and what it's going to do is I can choose at what point I want to export. So I want to choose the latest one in this case. I'm going to choose where I want to configure it, so I'm going to point it again to that S3 object storage. Here's everything that's being exported, so stateful sets, secrets, config maps, all of that. I get a nice little, was it JSON Web Token, JWT. I'm going to copy that, and then I'm going to go ahead and head over to my new cluster as I mess around with the mouse here. There we go, sorry, I have to wait for my export to finish. It'll take a bit of time. Again, we're setting this out to S3. I think I've sped it up for our benefit here. And what I'm going to do is head over to my RKE2 cluster. So this is a greenfield cluster. There's no location profile, so I'm going to set up the same S3 profile here. Call it S3 compatible. I'll punch in my bucket, and I think I obscured this so you guys can't hack my bucket. Okay, good, I did. And super simple. Again, we're pointing to that same S3 endpoint where we exported to. And say save profile. All right, we're in good shape. Next up is I can actually go and do an import policy to import, checking to make sure my export's done. It is, I'm good. Let's head over to RKE2. We'll create a new policy called import policy. And we'll call it import WordPress, I think is what I called it. Yeah, look at that. On demand. I could do this regularly, so a really good example for like hot warm DR is I could do this maybe every hour or something, and that way I can keep a running instance. But here I'm pointing to the S3 storage I just set up. I'll go ahead and run, I can run this, say yes, continue, and essentially what this is doing is it's grabbing the catalog that I from that S3 object storage, and by grabbing that catalog, we'll run, I'll be able to actually go see the application now and then perform the full import. So I'm getting ahead of myself, but you guys can probably tell where this is going. There it is, it's been imported. One important thing here though, we are switching clusters, right? We're moving from K3S to RKE2. I'm also changing storage. So my K3S cluster, I think I was running NetApp, like on tap. And then for my RKE2, I was using Longhorn. So I need to make sure that as I move it, to make sure the application comes up, I change my storage class. I can also do some fancy things, which I don't think I do in the demo here, but I can change to my ingress. I can change maybe from a traffic to traffic to Nginx, or maybe I'm coming from Red Hat because I'm sick of those guys, and they have routes, but routes don't exist in any other compliant Kubernetes distribution, so I can delete the route. So what I'm doing here, what am I grabbing? Yeah, so I'm looking at my storage. You can see I'm running on ONTAP. So I'm going to change it to Longhorn. I can do some nice tests. I can grab the YAML, actually see that it's being applied correctly. Again, for time, I don't think I showed that in the demo. And then now I'm going to go ahead and import my application as I fumble about. Oh, so here's my transform set. This is what I've created to change the storage class. Now I'm going to go to my removed apps. It's seen as removed because it doesn't exist in this cluster yet, but I've imported the catalog. Now I'm going to go ahead and actually perform the import. And I have all these options. I can overwrite. I'm going to apply a transform to change my storage class. And this is a lot of clicking and whatnot. Important thing to note here is everything we're doing here has equivalent YAML. So maybe the first time I'm doing this, I'll do it in the UI. I can establish the pattern. But when it comes time, I can actually then do this entirely via pipeline. Yes, sir. So the question was, so Kasten's deployed in the cluster into a namespace. Where are the backups being stored? So we keep a local backup, which whether that's technically a backup is a question. but we also export. So when I configure that location profile, I think in this case I was using Wasabi. That's sending it off to S3, which is Wasabi they're a cloud-provided S3 storage. But it could just be as easy like a min.io, or it could be S3 itself. And then we're good. So we're good there. We've backed that up. Put the icing on the cake here. Here's Harvester. I want to show us protecting Harvester VMs. So here's my cluster. It's a single node. Don't judge. I need to buy more hardware. And you'll see here, I think, yeah, look, it's a VM. Cool. So I want to back this up. Right, so this has to be wildly different, right? Not at all. We can do this all via Kasten in much the same way that we did for a containerized app. I set up a policy to back up that namespace where that VM lives. I go ahead and run it. Very much the same process, right? We perform the backup. We export off the cluster into S3 or S3 compatible, and then we have our backup of our VM. Good question. The question is, for VMs, are we using Veeam VBR, like logical consistency, all of that? So today, no. We are not using Veeam VBR application consistency. We have our own way to do that within Kasten. However, we are in active discussions about potentially looking at leveraging Veeam's VBR data mover, and therefore its format and its application awareness. Important thing is that you have application consistency, right? So for VMs today, it's very basic. We want QEMU tools to be able to actually quiesce or run. I think actually QEMU tools, you can do VSS now, QEMU tools. So base level, but you can also then run actions against the VM too. So we have, I didn't show it here, but we have something called Blueprints. And Blueprints, we use Canister. We donated that project to the CNCF this past year. That's the way that you can provide true application consistency. So maybe you're running so Canister Blueprints. Yes, sir.
Sorry for interrupting the demo.
No, it's done, so you're good.
Yes, so the question here is, what about functions that you find in Veeam 1 or the disaster or the recovery orchestrator by now, I think? Can you find this in Kasten as well?
Not today. Is it planned? Yes. Yeah, there's active. So I can't commit to timelines. I work in product. I can just talk about roadmap. But yes, active discussions about how we can integrate these. Do you use Veeam today? Use Veeam 1? You're familiar? Yeah. So I think you'll understand then too that architecturally Veeam 1 and Veeam VBR are very different than Kasten because of how we're deployed in the cluster. So there's kind of a reconciliation here where it's like, okay, what bits can we pull from VBR? What bits can VBR pull from us? So today we have a plugin into VBR, so you can see the state, the success, the failure of all your Kasten backup jobs, but it's read-only. As you can imagine, that's roadmap to change, where you can actually potentially schedule backup jobs, do all of that within VBR, and conversely, potentially, we're launching. It's been announced, so I can say it. There's Veeam Data Platform or Veeam Data Cloud, which is a SaaS, essentially backup solution, backup as a service, and that will be a unification between Kasten and traditional Veeam backup. Cool. It's running through the demo again, so you can ignore this. But
And you're at time.
at time. Any other questions? I went really fast, guys. I'm sorry. Cool. Well, thank you guys for attending so much. Really good questions.
Yes, thank you.
Cool.